world has changed, and it's going to continue to change. The next normal calls for evolving approaches to business advisory services, new measures, new methods, focused on identifying the pivotal pillars that you will need to rebuild your business through this pandemic. And that's why our purpose here with Business Rising Advisors is to provide you with one place that you can turn to for reliable, succinct synopses of the most relevant legal and business information you will need as you build your business to rise towards success again. In episode 1, we introduced key considerations for rebuilding from ground zero in this COVID pandemic. Well, today, we focus on critical foundations to build upon. Well, let's start with the foundational issues to consider in planning for employees to return to work. Marie, most of the nation is under some sort of stay-at-home order, with millions of workers all of a sudden working remotely, some are furloughed. We're starting to see many states and counties at the early stages now of returning to the workplace. What are some of the pivotal risk mitigation issues that I must be aware of as a business owner in order to bring my employees back into the workplace?
Well, Saji, now is the time for very careful planning, not diving in headfirst and figuring things out later. A game plan needs to be in place. And what needs to be considered is that many employees are going to be thrilled to return to work, many are not. And the ones who are not, some of them are going to not want to come back because they're making more money on unemployment insurance than they would be if they were actively working, but many are going to be impacted by fear. The most important thing is, if possible, allow the return to work initially to be voluntary. Many times, there is going to be an affirmative legal obligation on employers to accommodate an employee who doesn't want to come back to work, perhaps because of having someone at home who's high risk, perhaps being high risk themselves. And so accommodation, such as the extended leave of absence or remote work, will be necessary. And if an employee is forced to return to work or risk termination if they don't, that very likely can lead to a lawsuit.
So is it likely safer for an employer to wait a little longer?
Definitely. I would definitely recommend, unless it's very unusual circumstances, to wait to force employees to return to work, even when there is a good legal argument that you could terminate if they refuse to come back to work. It's not a risk worth taking in most situations for most employers.
That makes sense. That's a very, very well-considered approach, Marie. Let's talk about the health concerns now regarding COVID-19. How can I best protect myself from those issues as they relate to my workforce that's returning?
Well, what's critically important now is to develop a COVID-19 response plan. And that response plan should have two primary features. Number one is to reduce the risk of someone contracting COVID-19 in the workplace. And the second is to have a game plan in place for what happens if someone does come to work with COVID-19 or become exposed to someone with COVID-19. And that response plan should include establishing the appropriate social distancing at work, whether that's separating workstations by physical distance or by physical barriers. It should include considering the use of PPE like masks and gloves, and whether that's going to be voluntary or whether it's going to be mandatory. It should consider cleaning and sanitizing the place, who's going to do it, how often is it going to be done, how is it going to be done. All of that should be set out before employees en masse start coming back to the workplace. And another twist to consider for this is who's going to pay for all this. And if it's being required of the employee, then the employer definitely should pay. And even if not, it's still worth, I think, employers considering paying for the cost of any PPE, even if it's a voluntary PPE for an employee.
So, as an employer, I should not assume that employees know how to do any of this, right? I have an obligation to monitor guidelines that are out there.
That's a really good point, Saji. Training should be required for any PPE, even something as simple as a mask or gloves. That no employer should assume that an employee properly knows how to use them, how to dispose of them. And so training should be involved in anything any employer does with regard to the use of PPE in the workplace.
I see. Very, very important considerations. Thank you very much, Marie. Transitioning back to other areas that are key cornerstones of operations, now that we've heard about these issues, what about those employees who remain off-site? Barry, as Marie just illustrated, it's important to understand these important considerations in the remote workforce coming back in, but it's quite possible that we will never go back to a 100% office-centered workplace, right? So some amount of work from home is here to stay. Give us a key overview of what employers must know about this.
First off, work from home is not a new concept. I've had teams working from home for decades. What has changed is the dramatic increase in the number of workers working from home. Today, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, the Department of Homeland Security, specifically addressed this question with identification of 3 significant vulnerabilities for 2020 that primarily relate to work from home. The first is VPN vulnerabilities. Most people who are working from home are using VPNs, and there are vulnerabilities associated with this that must be patched. The second is hasty deployment of Office 365. These are things that have to be looked at. And finally, and probably most importantly, they say there's a vulnerability associated with poor employee education about security. This is something that a lot of organizations have been working on and needs to be reemphasized, along with, like Marie said, in this case, a response plan in case there's an incident and a way of recovering from an incident.
Makes sense. So got it. So now what can I as a business owner do to protect my business and my information, Barry?
There's some simple ways of doing this. The first is deal with vulnerabilities. Make sure your IT department, whether it's inside or outside the organization, is patching. Patch, patch, patch. Inside the business, patch user devices, and encourage employees to patch their own networks at home. The second is a concept called zero trust. You would not likely expect one of your employees to be working from Iran in the middle of the night. Zero trust is about ensuring that user rights are appropriate. They should be restricted to what they should be allowed to do, when they're allowed to work, from where, and using what devices, ideally. As I said earlier, the third is train the front line, security front line. Those are the employees. They're the security front line. You've got a supply chain for information, just like you may have a supply chain for manufacturing. Right. That supply chain is all your third parties. And third-party security programs should be put in place, particularly important because their employees are also working from home. And those third parties can include software companies, hardware companies, cloud services, business process outsourcing services, and service vendors.
How do I use the technology to build an IT infrastructure that supports the remote workforce?
There's a lot of good news here. The technology industry has recognized that employees and people are getting more and more mobile, and working from home is built into a lot of new technologies. Most of it's about moving the security to the cloud. So wherever these people are, they're protected. That includes cloud-based identity management, cloud-based firewalls, cloud-based anti-malware, cloud-based data loss protection. In essence, what the organization can do is start embracing the fact that employees can be mobile. They could be mobile any place. And in fact, at some point, you can start considering the office just another mobile environment.
Excellent points. Thank you, Barry. So it's helpful to know that we can mitigate risk while at the same time build an infrastructure that supports the needs of my evolving workforce going forward. Which brings us to forward-thinking accounting considerations. And Phil. So Phil, in episode 1, you definitely introduced the rules and strategies in approaching PPP loans and the funding needs at the time at ground zero. As we look ahead now, what important accounting considerations should a business owner keep in mind when they're receiving these funds?
So with round 2, Treasury issued further guidance on the need for a loan, announced that all of the loans in excess of $2 million are going to be audited. And some below that threshold are going to be audited as well. So there really needs to be economic uncertainty. Borrowers need to really take into account, what's going on with their current business activity, what's happening year over year, what access do they have to sources of liquidity. That's why the public companies, there was such an outrage because public companies usually are well capitalized and they have access to the public markets. Right. So that really wasn't the guidance and the intent. And so that was clarified by Treasury. But even private companies should really take a look and do an analysis of their business. What would it look like with the loan? What would it look like without the loan? And of course, as we sit here today in mid-May, it's very early. We don't know where this is going to go. But I think one of the things that the company should do is analyze what's going on. Am I having disruptions in my supply chain? Are some of my employees affected by the COVID-19, like a lot of the meat processing plants? What's going on there? What's happening in my industry? What's happening in my state or my region? And then what's my business risk if I take the loan or if I don't take the loan? If I think, okay, everything's fine, and I don't take the loan, and then things continue to get worse and worse and worse, what's going to happen to my business? So, if you're not a public company and you think that, your business has been affected, I think taking the loan is a smart move. And in fact, a lot of it needs to be used for, payroll and other things. But, if you can use the money and support your business, you want to make sure that survives.
Really good points, Phil. Really good points. So, okay, let's assume now the funds are in to help me sustain and rebuild my business. Let's talk about that component that you highlighted back in episode 1, the forgiveness component. What needs to be done, Phil, to track that forgiveness component?
So what we're doing for a lot of our clients who have received the loans is that tracking period, the 8-week period to track forgiveness, started when you receive the money. So what we're doing is we're assisting our clients on a weekly basis. We're tracking payroll, we're tracking the rent they pay, any mortgages they pay, utilities, healthcare benefits, profit sharing plans, et cetera. Those all qualify for forgiveness. But as I just mentioned, even a business that may be closed, if there's other things that you could use the loan for and improve your business, it might be wise to go ahead and take it, because it's a 1% loan, and the payments don't start for another 6 months.
Makes sense. So thanks, Phil. So now in episode 1, I recall that you set forth some key tax filing deadlines and things that we should be aware of, for where we are in the year amidst COVID-19. What updates can you share with our business owners today about these key dates?
So I think everybody's aware that the filing due date for last year's individual return is July 15th. When we last spoke, the first quarter estimate at April 15th had moved, but the second quarter estimate in June had not yet moved. Now those are both due on July 15th. So that's important because our clients want to know, even though you would think, well, they could wait, they really want to know what's going on with cash flow. How much money do I owe? What's my business looking like in 2020? And what am I paying tax for? So we're doing a tremendous amount of planning in addition to the compliance. Also, the IRS service centers are closed. Now, what the electronic returns are still being processed and refunds are being issued. But if you've paper filed your returns, and there are returns that are required to be paper filed, such as amended returns, those are not getting processed. Service centers are closed. People are having trouble getting through on the phone lines because there's disruptions there. If there are certain COVID-19 net operating loss carryback claims, there's a fax number that those can be sent to for faster processing.
These considerations from an accounting perspective, they're essential and very helpful. Anita, now we've heard about risk and more importantly, very specific ways that our business owner clients can get ahead of them as cornerstones for the business operations. I think it's time to bring it home and ask you to talk to us about the most salient issues as you see them as they affect workforce and team dynamics at this particular critical phase of rebuilding to rise again. Now, there's distractions at home, there's interruptions at work. We're now a few months into the pandemic. How are employees responding from home now, 2 months later?
Good question, Sanji. Reviewing survey findings from New York City-based consulting firm VegaFactor, there are 3 key negative motivators at play which have spiked recently. Starting with the first, emotional and economic pressure. Something we can all relate to. Employees are worried about losing their jobs, paying rent, and protecting their own health, as well as being separated from family and friends at this time. The second factor is play. This is the motive that most boosts performance. This can decrease if it continues to become more difficult to get things done from home. In a couple examples, people may miss the joy of problem solving with a colleague or the convenience of making decisions with having key contributors conveniently together in the same room. And then the third factor is purpose. This will also decline with the team's decreasing visibility into their impact on clients or colleagues, especially if there's no one there to remind them of the positive impact that they're having.
Those are all important points, Anita. Now, how can I support a more productive focus at this time for my remote workforce?
Saji, it's important to put people first and recognize that we have emotional beings, that we're asking to be productive under challenging circumstances at this time. For employers that offer employee assistance programs or EAP, let your team know that these counseling services are available to discuss personal or family-related concerns. It can be a great outlet to get these concerns predictively discussed and dealt with. Same advice for employers that offer medical insurance, such as mental health benefits that are included in those plans. It's good to let employees know that these exist.
Sure.
Also, keep in mind that people enjoy contributing their efforts in a productive manner, and many seek the opportunity to be more engaged in their work at this time. Employers that want to foster this engagement need to make work more engaging. Now, that term has been thrown around a lot, so I'd like to illustrate some ways to do this in the workplace and give people the opportunity to experiment and solve problems that really matter in real time. You can ask your employees, where can we deliver amazing service to our customers? What will drive growth even during a time of fear? What feels broken right now that our team can fix? And why are these problems critical, valuable, and interesting? When we help employees reframe obstacles into opportunities, it empowers them to become the hero of their own story. And that's the key to employee engagement. It encourages accomplishments that we can all applaud.
Fantastic, Anita. What I love about that is, we covered the cornerstones for rebuilding a business foundation to support success again, and the specific considerations that you just brought to mind. They demonstrate how employers can look to the situation and their workforce as strengths, as assets to help in the rebuilding to rise again. So thank you for that. The world has changed. It's going to continue to change. And while change is accompanied by risk, as you've heard today from our advisory team, this is also a period of great opportunity. Join us for each new episode of Business Rising Advisors as we continue to bring you the most important information you will need as you and your business rise again. I'm Saji Warden of the law firm U.S. Business Counsel. See you next time.